Hi everybody, this is Michael Hildebrand and I'm your host on the Sleeptrust podcast, where I'm talking about how to gain back trust in your ability to have a superb sleep again.
In this week's episode, we're going to talk about habits, the autopilot of our lives. If you are already familiar with the Sleeptrust podcast, you may be asking yourself if we're not a little bit off topic right now when we're talking about habits, as everything we're doing in the Sleeptrust podcast is to inform and entertain you all around sleep and giving you hopefully valuable information that you can use to enhance your sleep trust. But as you will see soon, habits are the underlying theme when it comes to implementing the information you're hearing here, reading in a book, getting out of TV, into your life, into concrete actions. So let's dive into the topic. And we will do so by hopefully not boring you out completely, as we're going to look at the definition of a habit. According to Wikipedia, a habit is a routine of behavior that is repeated regularly, so we've got this repetition component in here, and tends to occur subconsciously. And this last statement is so super powerful, as newest neuroscience says that up to 95% of all of our daily actions are performed subconsciously. So if we get knowledge and learn how to create new habits, that also means that we control the 95% of the subconscious actions. What happens when we build a habit through repetition of a behavior in our brain is that the same neurons get fired over and over again, and with every time they get fired, something like a path in our brain is built. You can imagine this process to work just the same as if you were to cross a piece of land. This piece of land has grass, only grass growing on it, and the grass is about as high as your hips. So what happens when you cross this piece of land the first time is that you will be very careful because you can hardly see the ground and you do not know if there are any holes or stones that will hurt you if you don't watch. So you will try to flatten out the grass with your feet, and it's going to take a time until you arrive at the other side of this piece of land. When you then turn back and look at the way you came from, you will be able to see where you went through, as the grass will be bent a little bit, and this will give you a good indication of the path you took. So if you would now go away for a couple of days and come back, you would not be able to see anything because the grass would have completely recovered in that time. But what happens when you take the same path right away again, and the next day again, and the day after that, you're going to constantly walk the path, is that this path is going to really build out to a point that there's not going to be any grass growing anymore, and you know this path you could walk this path with closed eyes. And this is exactly how our brains work. So if we are confronted with a task like crossing this piece of land, our unconscious mind will check if it can find a path going through this land. And if it does, it will execute on this unconsciously, and we do not have to care. If it doesn't find a path, it will inform our conscious mind and ask us to take a conscious decision on how to handle the situation. So where's the catch? Because we all know that changing our habits is not always, or better said, changing our behaviors is not always that easy. The first thing we have to do is really recognize that we're in a bad habit, so something we want to change. Saying we want to go to bed earlier. The second part of that is to decide what we want to do instead. So what is our better habit, our better behavior going to look like? that said, coming back to our example with the land, if we were running on this zigzag kind of path through the land, we want to imagine how the better path would look like. And doing so, this is a kind of a scoping theme. Doing so, we really should be clear about why we want to do so. So is that reason why we want to do so big that we will follow through and that we can see us and visualize us doing that? Because if we can't and we somehow have that feeling in our guts already that we're not going to follow through, we should just don't do it. We shouldn't do it because in the end, ultimately, we will not follow through, and that will decrease our trust in ourselves, because what we're saying unconsciously to ourselves is that we do not trust our commitments. So please be very clear about that point, about the scoping thing. Can you see and feel yourself following through? And if you can, then do it. And if not, just consider doing something else. The third thing to it comes right out of the definition. We now have to create our path. And we do so by repeatedly doing stuff. So repetition is the name of the game here. Walk in that new path once, twice, 10 times, 20 times, 100 times, until we have a clear big path. Please keep in mind, by doing so and opening up our new path, the old path is still there. And that's why it's so easy to fall back into bad habits. But as soon as we establish the new habit, we have got the choice to take the new path or the old one. And by consciously taking the choice in the beginning, it will get automatic soon. And by not using the old path, it will just vanish at some point in time. But that can actually take years. So repetition is the the name of the game here. And the last part, which is probably the secret sauce, is keeping yourself accountable. Meaning we should really measure what we do. And I'm going to help you out here with a little tool I created for myself a couple of years ago when it came to changing a couple of my habits. And it is as easy as writing down the habit you want to have and taking notes every day if you followed through. And this is only a little stroke. If you did it, give yourself a stroke. And if you didn't make it a day, no problem. Just keep in mind that you're accountable to yourself and give that stroke the next day. And that way, even if you miss a day, it's not that bad, because at the end of the month or after 3 months, you will see that the more strokes you have, the better you are in performing your new habit. Oh, excuse me. So that's basically one easy thing. I'm going to give you that. There's also, you can download the cheat sheet for free at sleeptrust.eu. And I will also recommend you using an app I use on a regular basis, and on regular I mean daily. The app is called Better Habits. I will put in a review at some point in future to show how that app works, but it's very, very simple. You can put in 1 to 3 habits, and according to how hard you think it's going to be to establish this new habit, you can also set the number of repetitions you want to go through. And by the way, the repetition, that's an own science on its own. Habits which are easier for you to build from your this is basically just a thing you have to listen to your feelings. If it feels easy, it's probably not going to take that many repetitions to create that new habit. But it usually takes, say, somewhere between 2 months and a year to create a new habit, depending on how hard it is for you to perform in this habit. So that's what you should keep in mind. And it's going to get easier every day. So if I say it can take up to a year, it's not going to be exhausting for a year. It's going to be hard in the beginning. But if you follow through on a daily basis, it's going to get easier with every day. And you can believe me, I cracked up a couple of really hard habits for me, starting with quitting to smoke and other things. It's just getting easier every day. So follow through on that. Use my cheat sheet I'm going to give you for free. use the app. And the best thing of all is to get a real life person to hold you accountable. Because if you do so, and he or she is going to ask you, maybe on a daily basis, send you a WhatsApp message and asking you if you performed on that thing, you are really going to get under this. It doesn't sound nice, but it's some kind of a social pressure putting on yourself, and that's really helpful too. So I can recommend getting an accountability partner if you have a hard habit for you. And you're committed, do that, because it'll really help you and make things easier, especially in these days we all know which are harder and it takes a little bit more effort. And if you know you're going to get that question asked in the evening, you're highly more likely to perform that action that day. So let's wrap up this episode real quickly. If we want to change a new habit, we first have to be clear and recognize what habit we want to change. Then we have to do a little bit of scoping. So what do we want to change? How do we want to change? And particularly, why do we want to change that? Because that's going to give us the reason to follow through. And we should only start building up new habits if we are willing to follow through. The next part is to be clear about the repetition. Decide on how often you want to repeat to create this new path through the land. And the harder you feel this habit to be, or the more important, those would be the two criteria for me. The higher I would set the number of repetitions. And last but not least, keep accountable. Use the cheat sheet you can download for free at sleeptrust.eu in the podcast section. Use the Better Habit apps. I think you can only get it on iOS. And think of getting an accountability partner when it gets to bigger habits or things that are harder to follow through for you. I will not map this onto any practical sleeping kind of issues. You can do that on your own. You get plenty of ideas through the podcasts out of the past and the podcasts that are going to come in future, and through the things you particularly already know about yourself and your sleeping habits. So I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of the Sleep Trust podcast. In next week's episode, we will talk about gratitude, the power of gratitude, and that's a good theme to test this habits creation pattern for you. So until then, have a superb sleep.
Hey there, and thanks for listening to the Sleep Trust podcast. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you want to get further information on this podcast or material that will help you to gain back your sleep trust, please check out sleeptrust.eu. That's sleeptrust.eu, where you will get lots of information around sleep. And here comes some legal stuff. Everything on this podcast is my opinion only, so do not take it as an advice, as I am not a doctor, nor have I considered your personal situation. If you feel that you need medical advice, please consider getting an appointment at your doctor of trust. If you want to give me any kind of feedback on this podcast, feel free to email me at podcast@sleeptrust.eu. I hope you tune in again next week, and until then, have a good sleep.